My name is Jane Debevoise, and I'm the former chair of Asia Art Archive in Hong Kong, the current chair of Asia Art Archive in America, but most importantly, I am a long-term, long-standing booster of Asia Art Archive in Hong Kong, Asia Art Archive in America, in Brooklyn, which is where I am right now, and in Delhi, India, where we have an office. I welcome all of you here today, the audience from around the world. We are delighted to be co-hosting this event with Asia Art Archive in Hong Kong. Our colleagues, Christopher Ho, our Executive Director of Asia Art Archive in Hong Kong, and Susanna Chung, who heads our programming there, will be with us today and speaking a bit later. Unfortunately, one of our colleagues, Özge Ersoy, who was announced on the program, contracted COVID. She lost her voice, and she is now quarantining and healing in a hotel room in Germany. So unfortunately, she will not be able to join us tonight. Tonight, our program is divided into two parts. We have a 40-minute virtual tour. It's actually a screening of a tour that was taped in June, and it's led by Chris and Özge. They will appear on the screen and go through the program with you. There will be a reference, so just a heads up, there will be a reference to a program to come. The screening was done in June, and it is now July, and that program has come and gone, but it is available now on Facebook, and will be available on our website, Asia Art Archive website. The other section, the 20 to 25 minutes, will be left at the end for a Q&A with Chris and Susanna. I will moderate that. Please put questions into the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. And I really hope that people will engage, because this is a good time to talk to our friends who are our colleagues who were there. And I think there's, because of the travel restrictions and everything, there are not as many people perhaps going to Documenta this year. And it is an incredible opportunity. Before we start the tour, the virtual tour, I want to say a few things, though, about sort of the subject that we're engaging here. Collectivity. As I expect most of you know, ruangrupa is a collective from Indonesia, and they are the organizers of this Documenta and invited 50 other collectives, who in turn invited 1,500 artists to participate in the this year's program, this year's Documenta. And I'm assuming that most people who are listening here today know what Documenta is, but just in case, it's an expansive exhibition project that takes place every 5 years in Kassel, Germany. And while Asia Art Archive in America would not self-identify as a collective, we were delighted and are delighted to be invited to participate, because collectivity has been one of our abiding interests and concerns for the last 20+ years. For example, just recently at Asia Art Archive in Brooklyn, our most recent two events engaged 4 collectives based in New York and in Malaysia. For information about those events, please look for the documentation that we have posted on our website, the Asia Art Archive in America website, which my colleagues, I think, will be able to put into the link. And over the years, we have done many programs, or organized many programs on the subject, as well as archived collective activities. So the question is, why are we so interested in collectivity? On one hand, we could say that collectivity as a practice offers an important and constructive challenge to established art world conventions that sometimes ignore, exclude, or devalue particular types of artists, or artists from particular parts of the world, or particular forms of art practice. Or we could say that collectivity offers a healthy corrective to the pervasive celebrity culture that obsesses over star artists and sky-high auction prices. But I think our interest, or perhaps I should say my interest, my personal interest, stems from the fact that in many parts of the world, especially the non-West, and of course I'm speaking today from the perspective of Asia Art Archive, i.e. the perspective of Asia, collectivity is a necessity. It is a necessity because it creates opportunity and space, where opportunities and spaces for art and artists generally are limited or even non-existent due to the lack of infrastructure and support. In other words, in many parts of the world, collectivity is a lifeline for art. Now, there are many other things we can talk about, but I will leave it like that for now and turn the screen over to my colleagues to share their experience and thoughts on the subject, as well as their time at Documenta. Thank you.
So Asia Art Archive, it has been working on Documenta now intensively for at least 6 months, but really long before. Ruangrupa, the collective from Indonesia that was selected to curate Documenta this year, was founded in 2000, so the same year as Asia Art Archive. And as organizations and people, we have been friends with them for many, many years. And so we share a lot of values of generosity and values of collective care for the collective. And for them, they took this idea of lumbung as the kind of core principle of this year's Documenta. And I think Özge will say a few words about lumbung.
So lumbung is actually this architectural structure that's very spread around, and that's very common in the rural side of Indonesia. And it translates as the rice barn. And the interesting thing about it is that this is where all the farmers would place the surplus harvest. And in the structure, in the drawing that you see on the right, for instance, this is a drawing by one of the members of ruangrupa. And the top section would be where they would store the rice. The middle section would be, as they call it, the living room. So, you know, we can see some individuals sitting and chatting with each other in this drawing. And then the ground floor would be where people move around, and they will be just interacting with each other. So but this is as Chris was saying, that this is the principle of organizing the biennial as well as the theme, I would say. And when it comes to resource, so that idea of resource sharing is something that is not only about what they asked us to respond to, but the whole structure of the exhibition has been organized in this way.
And so that architecture of the lumbung, those 3 levels, translated in 2 ways at least to the main venue of Documenta, which is the Fridericianum, a old public museum in Kassel. So it's 3 floors, and roughly the 3 floors were separated into that living room, which, as you see, you know, behind us is a version of this kind of shared living room. The storage area for the surplus, and then the harvest space. So that's one way that kind of physically there's a correlation. The second is that they decided to turn this museum into a school. And so that was the other kind of big conceptual move that ruangrupa made for this Documenta. So this is not an exhibition traditionally of artworks. It is a school which is now based on process, on ideas, on conversations, and on exchange. and on ideas that might last long after the actual 100 days of the exhibition.
And when we think about the history of this building, it's also quite interesting to look at how it was used before. It was used as a library. At some point, it was used as a parliament for a short period of time. And for the longest time, it's been one of the major museums as well. And it's also one of the oldest public museums in the world that opened in the 18th century. And for us, it's also interesting that we are on the ground floor of this building right now, but for the exhibition, we will be going to the first floor. And if you think about the drawing in the previous slide, that is the living room. And it's something, it was a really interesting conversation between us and the artistic team. We said that maybe you want think about archives as storage spaces, but we said that it's for us, it's very important to activate our resources and engage people all the time with the programs that we do, and that with the commitment to engage artists and researchers and curators in the process. And that's also the reason why we are not located on the top floor, but on the first floor of the building. So as Chris was saying in the beginning, this has been an incredible collective endeavor. And for us, we've been part of this group of 11 different collectives from across the world that we've been working very closely. So the list that you are seeing on the screen, these are the collectives that we've been closest to. And you'll see that there are collectives of arts educators, there are archivists, there are makers, there are designers. So it's a really diverse group of people that we've been working with. And maybe you want to say a couple of words about the major list that we've been part of, Chris.
Absolutely. So the slide on the right-hand side of the screen, that is actually a sketch of the space that Ozge and I, a preliminary sketch of the space that Ozge and I are sitting in now. And the way that this came to be is during multiple Zoom calls, they all had to be Zoom because of COVID. Over multiple Zoom calls, these collectives that are listed on the left, including us, met every 2 weeks. And the meeting method, let's say, is this term mejeles, which is a space where people kind of hang out. They sit and they shoot the crap, and they just kind of let conversations meander. And this was one of the kind of main working modes of this documenta. And you can see the result, one result of it behind us.
And in most of the cases with this type of large-scale exhibitions, as you know, when the artists are invited, they are often in conversation with the curatorial team, with the artistic team. But if you're a participant, you don't necessarily know about what the others are working on. So I think that was one of the major differences with this documenta. So we met each other in November, and you can see the photographs of our research trip with Susanna and myself. And this is the first time that we actually concretize these terms, sustainability, friendship, and resource sharing, because we were also very curious how the structure would reflect that. As a theme, of course, we understand these concepts as abstract concepts, but it was really amazing to see them in practice. For instance, Ruru House, the building that you see on the left, it's a building that the ruangrupa, the collective, built and made sure that it was functioning like a year in the lead up to the exhibition. And the whole idea is that the ground floor was this exhibition space for the castle-based collectives to take ownership. The display on the ground floor would also change every week. There would be a co-working space on the first floor, as well as a kitchen, and then also all of these meeting rooms, including, I would say, the team as well. So it's actually the first time in the history of Documenta that they are really bringing all the team members and this living space and kitchen all together, so that people can really start feeling and exchanging ideas about what the Documenta is going to be. So this is, again, one of the examples of the meetings that we had. On the left, you see a glimpse of the co-working space that's used for these meetings with the castle-based collectives. And on the right, you see a photograph from the kitchen. When we came for the research trip, this is also where we cooked all the time. And for instance, we were asking for meetings with the ruangrupa members, to figure out certain logistical issues. And they said, there are no meetings, just go to Ruru House, find them, and this is when you have the conversation with them. So that idea that there is no formal structure, there is no formal way of meeting each other, but really people keep spending time with each other in the same space. And I think this is also very key to what we will see today.
And one of the things to note is that ruangrupa, the curators of this documenta, they were founded in 2000 in a living room. So from the very start, their process was one of hanging out. And here we see the juxtaposition of the lumbung drawing on the upper part of the left-hand slide, and then the Fridericianum on the bottom. And just to point out, the Fridericianum right now, it's not just a school, but there is an entire section for kids and babies. There are dorms here, and there's a kitchen. So actually, during the run of Documenta, people are living here. People are using it as this social space to hang out. So very, very, it's a very unique approach to an exhibition.
Yeah, quite unusual, and we believe that that was also one of the most difficult negotiations they had to have, because imagine this 18th century building, and they are literally sleeping right now in the next room. So it's quite incredible to have this.
So now for the next few slides, we'd like to turn to how Asia Art Archive internally kind of developed our exhibition or our display. And we very much took inspiration from this, or took cue from this idea of the Magellas, of hanging out. And over a couple of months, Ozge and Susanna gathered the artists who are part of the Asia Art Archive team in Hong Kong and in India, and we hung out.
We did, and it was really unusual way of working for us as well, because as you might be familiar with it, we often work as the programs team to activate the collections that we have. We work closely with the research team oftentimes to develop exhibitions. But one of the very interesting thing about this process was that we said, why don't we tap into the different forms of knowledge within the team? And Chris's suggestion was that, why don't we work with the visual artists in the team? And it's one of the most special things about Asia Art Archive. We really have around 8 to 9 artists who are full-time. But when they work as librarians, they work as collection assistants, or they work as part of the programs team, and as well as the communications team. So we have artists in different teams at AAA, and we said that why don't we use this opportunity to come together and to brainstorm together. So starting with the artists and brainstorming together was one of the most special parts about this process for the Asia Art Archive team.
Exactly, and what we see on screen here is a drawing from someone Lydia from one of the from the collections team. One of her early ideas for the installation that Asia Art Archive would do, and please note the round table, which we will see the iteration of it upstairs in a few seconds. One idea that one kind of, just to go on with what Ozge just said, is one of the concepts or one component of lumbung, to put it in ruangrupa's own words, is, quote, the notion that power is in rotation and interchangeable, end quote. So this idea of a kind of interchangeable power where someone can hold authority, but the next day someone else holds authority, was very much a part of these Magella sessions that we had within AAA. And on screen here, we see another kind of brainstorming session of what Asia art, in a very abstract way, of course, what Asia Art Archive's contribution can be.
And these are some of the things that we started talking about, starting with the very first meeting. We asked the artists themselves, how do you learn as artists, and what are the most interesting things in the archive for you when we ask that question to each other? So starting from the very beginning, they didn't say that, oh, you know, we want to think about art school, or we want to think about the things that we can learn from books, but actually things that we learn with our body. So the embodied knowledge was one of the first terms that we started discussing. Creative annotation was another of these terms. So not necessarily only pulling out resources together and thinking about archival materials, but how we can creatively interpret these materials that we have in the archive, and how we can weave different stories across different collections and different materials that we have at AAA. And of course, archives as shared sites of coming together, and also knowledge sharing was one of the first discussion points for the group and for our brainstorming too.
So hopefully you'll see these kind of 4 rubrics that we came up with the artist team at AAA now as we walk upstairs and show you the display that we have.
So on the screen now you have a larger view of the common library on the ground floor of the building. As we were saying, these 11 collectives that really care about education, with us coming together, thinking about how we can turn this whole building into a temporary school for the duration of the exhibition. This is how it gets concretized. So right now it's of course very silent, because, you know, again, it's the off hours, but only in June. So, you know, we have 2 weeks left for this month. We will be organizing more than 280 programs, you know, in this space and also in other sites of Documenta as well. But it really shows how engaged all of these participants are, all of these collectives and artists are in thinking about how we can create the social space. So it's really not only about the display, it's really not only about the exhibition making, but they really have equal weight when we think about why this Documenta matters this much, and how we are trying to think about idea of education, idea of archiving, and creating social spaces with all of these collectives. Maybe we can start walking and go to the top floor, to the first floor. And maybe one thing that we can mention with Chris is that in one of those meetings with the artists, we said that we don't want you to only stay in the gallery space, but we want to spillovers. You know, we are interested in these transitory spaces. So the photographs that you see here, these are reproductions of black and white photographs from the 1970s by Jyoti Bhatt. We already start seeing some of these visual hints about the display that we have on the first floor. And also this idea came in one of these brainstorming meetings that we had with the artists in the team.
And the drawings themselves in the sketches in the staircase are threshold drawings. And so we also thought it would be appropriate to place them in a threshold space as you walk up the Fridericianum and then walk into the galleries.
Good morning. So here we are in one of the galleries on the first floor of the Fridericianum, and the immediate area is for Asia Art Archive. And for us, it's also very important that we are sharing the gallery with 2 more collectives. The first one, literally next to us, is the Black Archives from Amsterdam. It's a collective that really cares about the history of the Black emancipation movement in the Netherlands. And in the back, we have another archive, this time from Algeria, that really documents the history of the women's struggle and the feminist movement in Algeria, starting with the 1960s. You will notice that there are no walls in the gallery, so we really wanted to have this almost fluid space and not to have these designated areas for the collectives that are very clear cut. So again, the idea of spillover was something that we were also thinking about the gallery space itself.
And that idea of spillover also continues into the specific archives that we chose to highlight and the works and the documents that we chose to highlight. There's a number of interconnections between each, let's say, object or material that we show. And we also selected collectives that we have in our archives that kind of were in the spirit of ruangrupa's lumbung. And here we see a group of the people who were involved in the Faculty of Fine Arts in Baroda in India. And this was one of the groups that we decided to highlight.
Mm-hmm. What was really special about this group in Baroda in India was that they really started working together as a community that's associated with a school in the 1960s. And that was the time that was after the independence, and all these artists were thinking about their role, about how do we rethink our artistry, our own artistry, and do we really want to keep separating the crafts from the fine arts, and the daily materials, the traditional materials, from what we are using in our studios that are really, at that point, that was quite, I would say, categorized and rigid across painting, sculpture, photography, design. So they were looking for these fluid exchanges between these mediums, very much like what ruangrupa has been doing since the year 2000.
Indeed, and if you remember, one of the 4 rubrics that the working team came up with was embodied knowledge. And in some ways, these artists from the Faculty of Fine Arts in Baroda were interested not just in what they learned, but rather what was already perhaps in their body through habit, through inculturation, through repetition, through iteration, things like the Rangolis and things like kind of traditional motifs and methods that end up being a part of their production.
And the photograph that we are looking at right now, it's a photograph from the early 1970s from the same school, from Baroda. And we see the faculty members as well as the students creating this installation, this large-scale installation outside. It's still within the borders of the school. So it was a really amazing example about how the teachers, they thought about extracurricular activities when they were not able to change the curriculum. So this was called the Fine Arts Fair, which was this event that lasted for about 2 decades between the 1960s and 80s. And the teachers were really encouraging their students to work with daily materials, to work with traditional materials, and to think about the mediums that they were not able to experiment, let's say, in the classroom or in the studio. And please go ahead.
Well, I think that's absolutely fascinating. And one thing you'll note is that we have decided to put in documents, photographic documents, as well as artworks, as well as things that are in between. For instance, right now you're looking at KG Subramanian's toys that were produced, and they're somewhere in between art, craft, object, and documentation. And we wanted to really mix that up in the spirit of ruangrupa and also in the spirit of the Baroda School, where it is about daily life. So we wanted to really highlight the processes and the objects from daily life, as well as high art.
And it was something that was very key for KG Subramanian, who is one of the most well-known modernist artists from India. And he's really well-known with the large-scale murals, large-scale paintings. So a lot of people won't be necessarily familiar with this type of work that he was doing. And similarly, we have a lot of children's books that he designed for the Fine Arts Fair. We have the original ones on loan from the university itself. We are very privileged that we have this chance to exhibit them. But we also wanted to make sure that people could interact with them. We have these books that are recent reproductions by Seagull Publication. And again, before K.G. Subramanian passed away in 2016, this publisher was really in close conversation with the artist, saying that how can we even further circulate these folkloric forms that K.G. Subramanian was using in the stories that he wanted to tell with these books. Again, all of these children's books, they were made in the 1970s and in the 1980s for the Fine Arts Fair. So I think this is a really great start to think about what type of artists we wanted to highlight and what type of collective endeavors we wanted to highlight with our display. So we'll go through 2 more groups with you, but perhaps one thing that we can emphasize is that all these people, all these artists, what they're interested in is to look at the daily life, to look at vernacular culture, and to look at the cultural forms that are either disappearing or they are often neglected or they are overlooked. So for instance, Chris, you were speaking about the threshold drawings that we saw in the staircase. These, for instance, drawings, it's if you want to learn about it, it comes from the family. So, you know, it's usually often women who would teach each other how to make these drawings for these ritualistic purposes. And every day, I would say in the morning, and they would disappear by the end of the day. But again, these artists were interested in, including Jyotibat, were interested in these living traditions, things that you wouldn't be able to learn at art school or things that you wouldn't be able to learn from books. But they really wanted to say that we are committed to study these forms, we are committed to analyze them, and we are committed to interpret them. So it's not a static understanding of cultural preservation that we are talking about. All of these artists, including the other 2 collectives that we're going to talk about, they really creatively interpret these forms. They incorporate them into their artistic practice. And in the end, they are interested in circulating them even further through publications, through photographs, through toys, through their pedagogy. So very different formats that they would be interested in using.
Indeed, and really, I think what Özge is saying also brings up, at least for me and hopefully for you, very interesting questions. For instance, what are some of the living traditions that surround us now and that might actually be invisible to us as contemporary people? So I think that's it can bring up interesting questions for us to reflect on today as well.
Mm-hmm. And for the Baroda section, we were speaking about how artists were looking and studying and learning from traditional forms and traditional crafts movements. This is another incredible example that we have in our collections. And the collective's name is Wu Manifesto. They are a feminist artist collective that started in the mid-1990s. And what they've been doing, especially in the early 2000s, was to go to the rural side of Thailand. We're speaking about an international group of people that were active, that was active in Thailand itself, but with the early 2000s, they really wanted to think about how they can learn from each other, how they can also learn from other communities. And this was the time when they decided to go to the rural areas and engage with the local crafts groups and learn from them. And in exchange, also organize workshops and teach the skills that they had, you know, such as video making. You know, these contemporary artists were interested in those ideas of exchange that would be mutual. And the image that we are seeing on the screen right now, these are 3 artworks by Onanong Blinsiri, and these are mats that were functional in the workshop that they were made in rural Thailand in the early 2000s. So when you look at the material, you would see how the artist herself, she learned from the local craftspeople. So she viewed, you know, it's a viewing technique that's very specific to this Isan region. And she also wanted to convey the collective experience of these artists coming together, learning from each other, learning from the crafts communities. So that's the reason why we see the images. These are the photographs of the artists who participated in the workshop. On the left, we see Varsha Nair, who's an artist, also one of the co-founders of Manifesto, and who actually studied in Baroda in India, in the school that we were talking about. So there is this close connection between them as well. In the middle, we see Paptavan Suvarnakund, an artist from Thailand, and we'll speak about one of her artworks in a minute. And on the right, we see Onanong Siri, the artist who made these works. And we also would like to share with you two more artworks that we have. We of course have archival materials that, you know, I hope you will be able to come and see. And for us, again, you know, mixing or juxtaposing archival materials with the original works on loan, it's been something that we've been wanting to do from the very beginning. And what's really interesting about these two artworks is that they reflect similar urgencies to Onanong Siri. For instance, we were speaking about Paptavan Suvarnakund, the tubular, the long artwork that you see on the right. It's an artwork that she made in 2000 in the village, in the farm. And it's a cotton weaving technique that she learned from one of the local craftspeople. But on top of it, she wanted to use handwritten notes that would tell us the story of two things. First of all, her ancestors in this region, especially her father, who also spent his childhood in this specific village that all of these artists were coming together and working together. So that idea of relaying the collective experience of the artists and the local communities that they were engaging, it was something that was really common across these works. And on the right, we see another work. This time it's a basket. And it's again this traditional technique that the artist Carla Saxe learned from the local groups. So you will see that the more brown side, they are old newspapers. This is a work from 2001. So the artists learn how to roll them and then turn them into this basket. But then there are the whiter parts with handwritten notes. And again, similar to the other two artists that we talked about, Carla Saxe was interested in asking the artists, the participants to tell their own stories, you know, what was happening in the village, what were their dreams about the village, what they really wanted to learn from each other. So overall, we see that idea of engaging other people in the artwork. So they are not these isolated pieces. They were on display in the farm and they were showing how they worked as a collective, how they learned from each other as a collective. And maybe one last thing that I can say about Carla Saxe is that she's an artist from East Germany. So we are looking at a collective that really consists of a wide range of artists from different parts of the world. And we were so lucky to have Carla Saxe visiting the exhibition and telling more stories about it. And again, as an archive, it's something that we are interested in. Keep multiplying all the stories that we can talk about, starting with the artworks and starting with the archival materials.
Indeed, and the exhibition title or the display title is Translations, Expansions. And Ozge, I think you're talking about the expansions part of that, is really to keep things expanding and learn more about the artworks and then also the participants.
Absolutely. And perhaps we can speak about the last section, which is perhaps a more loose collective that we can talk about, which is the performance art festivals and the network that the artists created through these events in the 1990s, starting with the 1990s and Southeast Asia. So we do have a selection of posters that really show how this international group of artists, they came together, especially artists from East Asia and Southeast Asia. These performance art festivals. At this time, it was not necessarily an art form that was recognized by the art centers or art institutions in the region. So everything had to be independently organized, independently run. So the artists, they were engaging with each other and developing this network, not to only show their own work, but also create that exchange platform from each other. And again, similar to Baroda and similar to Manifesto, they were interested in learning from each other. And we also have a selection of videos that are from the archive for this section, because we are using old TVs, you know, to reflect the spirit of the time. It might be the perfect translations, let's say, you know, when we have it on the video, it might be a little bit choppy, but we want to say that the examples that we would see here would be artists from Singapore, artists from Indonesia, artists from Myanmar, not only performing in their own cities, in their own countries, but going to other places. So for instance, we would have Malui Meng, you know, an artist who was very well known in the experimental performance scene in East Village in Beijing in the 1990s. He would perform in Jakarta International Performance Art Festival. Or when it comes to Arahmeniani, who's a very well-known artist in Indonesia, Arahmeniani, she would go to Tokyo, and this is where she would perform. And maybe we can also speak about, you know, how we think about performance, because oftentimes when we say traditional forms and performance almost in opposition to each other, and it's something that we were also interested in, because these artists, they are not necessarily thinking about tradition versus not tradition, or modern or contemporary, but they're really thinking about how they can engage with the daily life, how they can engage with vernacular forms. So they would use everyday objects, they would move away from the gallery, they would start performing on the street. So we actually see that connection about what they can capture from the daily life, how they can interpret it, and how they can document that practice as well.
Exactly. And many of the artists documented each other's practices and wrote about each other's practices. And we had the privilege of having Ray Langenbach here for this as a visitor to this exhibition. And he was one of the key people who documented his peers' work.
Absolutely. So again, artists becoming storytellers themselves, and not only going to these festivals as performing artists, but they would really think about their other roles, about documenting each other's work when no one was, and teaching, and organizing workshops. So I think overall, you know, Chris, as you were saying, that idea of translations and expansions, translating the daily materials into artworks, into their pedagogy, into different forms of circulation, and then always finding ways to share this knowledge with other people. So not, let's say, making sure that the knowledge doesn't only stay in the artworks, in the gallery space or in art institutions, but going out on the street and sharing with other people and engaging other people to learn from these forms as well.
Exactly, very, very well said. So those are the three kind of groups that we have in our display. And I think it would be a great time to open it up for questions, or if you would like to also just re-look at something, we can also point the camera in that direction and speak a little bit more about it. For instance, right now, Samira is pointing to the table, and if you recall, in one of the early slides we showed, we had a drawing of a circular table, and so this is the version of it that happened.
Mm-hmm. And maybe one thing that I can also add, and Chris, why don't we sit here? Also, one thing that we would like to highlight is that for us, it was also important to extend this invitation to other people. I think it was, you know, in the very beginning, we were saying that around, let's say, 55 collectives were invited for this exhibition. But if you look at the list of artists, we have more than 1,000 of people. So similar to us for Asia Art Archive, we received the invitation, but then we extended this invitation to around 20 artists and artist collectives. And also thinking about other ways of engaging with our community. So for the case of Hong Kong, We do have several videos from Hong Kong, from one of the performance art festivals in 2006 with the Hong Kong artists. But we also wanted to invite Tan Kuo Hin and Mei Fung, two artists from Hong Kong that we've been working with for the longest time, to invite them to Kassel in July and basically organize these series of talks and workshops along with the other collectives, including ruangrupa itself. So again, we've been thinking about this contribution not only as a chance to present our collections, but really to extend this invitation to other artists and other communities. And,
exactly.
And if you would like to join us, that one is going to be live streamed as well. And I'm sure Crystal and her team would be sharing the links and the information as well. But going back to these only 280 events that are only happening in June, we are partially responsible for that as well. So we will be organizing many events, including this week and also in July.
Exactly, and I have to say, as someone who, Oscar and Susanna really kind of spearheaded and Samira really spearheaded the kind of coming together of this. It was only after I personally, in person, arrived in Kassel and experienced Magellas that I truly understood this process of hanging out and what it feels like, what it looks like, and how it, in a way, how different kinds of ideas emerge from this process. So if you do have an opportunity, even on Zoom, to kind of sit in on one of our programs in the future, I highly recommend it. It may be atypical and maybe unusual, not your typical meeting that you've been to, but it's an experience that I find incredibly rewarding and memorable. Not your typical meeting that you've been to, but it's an experience that I find incredibly rewarding and memorable.
Well, that was great. We're going to get Susanna and Chris back on the screen. But before the first question that will be asked, I just wanted to take this opportunity, as everybody is thinking about their questions, to thank our wonderful sponsors, or our wonderful supporters and friends who've helped us make this incredible exhibition and experience happen. Documenta obviously itself was an enormous champion and sponsor to the program and to our exhibition and our space. But also we have close friends, Wendy Lee and Stephen Lee, as well as Virginia and Wellington E. So we have to thank them very, very much. And I hope that's given people enough time to think about more questions. And the first question I think I would like to ask, this I will give to Susanna and to Chris. Chris, you've been speaking a lot in the film, so I'm going to give this one off to Susanna. Could you talk a little bit about the Hong Kong artists who came to Documenta and how that experience was, what they did, what the program was, if there was a program, and how the audience and you all engaged with them?
Thank you so much, Jane, and thanks everyone here with us in this tour. So I just come back from Documenta. I'm in Hong Kong. So I just finished a week of program with the Hong Kong artists in conversation with ruangrupa and Good School on site. So the idea basically, when we got the invitation from ruangrupa, what they're interested in, of course, is AA because of the collection that we have, but also because of the network and our ecosystem. So for ruangrupa, what they care about is the extending the ecosystem so that more people can be part of the whole Documenta project. So that's why when Oscar mentioned just now is now we have over 1,000 artists who have involved. So when we are invited, so we are thinking about how could we contribute? On one hand, through translation expansion at the exhibition, which we display what we display. But at the same time, we are thinking about how can we bring Hong Kong in more. So since the whole idea of lumbung is about sharing, about knowledge sharing, about space sharing, about resource sharing. So then to us, we reflect, in Hong Kong, we have a few artists, who really running space, which is in a really in the same spirit as lumbung. So we invite Mei Fong, who is very experienced, who running we call it a vertical artist village in Hong Kong in the middle of the city. So she operates that, and she really opened it as a space to bring like-minded people. And at the beginning, she said that she opened it for individual artists who need space, but the more recently, she are more interested to bring in groups, and that we call collectives now. But bringing groups together that can do more. This is what she sees, and also. May is very established, but we are also very aware that there's a younger artist who called Tang Kwa Hin, who turned his own village house, who is a indigenous Hong Kong people, the family, Tan family. He opened up his own house as a space of sharing after 2019. I think that really helped to bring community together, to provide safe space in a semi-private space. So by bringing these two case studies with two generations together in conversation with Indonesia, Jakarta. So in conversation with the ecosystem and the ecology, that ruangrupa and Gusku. So Gusku is ruangrupa is part of Gusku, is a collective of collectives. So we bring four of them together in a conversation early last week. On one hand, we have this public talk that we record. For those who are interested, you can always go to first go to a Facebook page. The live stream is already there. It's recorded. Later on, will be on a website. At the same time, we also have an extended handout session. So handout is so important for the whole project. We brought them in conversation with Gusku study program. So Gusku, basically they teach different collectives or share knowledge with different collectives in the region to think about collectivity. So by bringing Mei Fong and Tang Kwa Hin, they have more intense discussion about the idea of space sharing that I think many of us are facing. Even people in like Australia, we feel that it's very established, but how can small and alternative spaces or initiative, how can they support each other? So I think this kind of sharing is very knowledgeable. On one hand, we feel it's very different, right? Like Hong Kong and Jakarta. But when the city continue to develop, when the urban continue to develop, we see the kind of learning that could happen among us.
Chris, I was just wondering if you have anything to add to that. I know that this issue of good school came up several times, and I even, as many times as I've heard about it, have found the relationship between ruangrupa and good school and what exactly good school is a bit blurry in my head. And I was wondering if you could talk about it and then potentially talk about what we're doing with good school in the future, because I know we have a project with them that's coming up pretty soon.
Absolutely. It is confusing. I mean, there's a series of terms, I think, Magellas and lumbung that come up during this documenta, and they're initially confusing, but also quite important in terms of how they can introducing these terms can also, at least they helped me understand a kind of shift in paradigm or perspective in approaching art. Good school is, as the name suggests, a school that consists of different collectives, and one of those collectives that are part of Good School is ruangrupa. And Asia Art Archive, for our inaugural exhibition in our new library opening this September, will feature Good School. But of course, as Susanna just said, with this idea of expansion and opening up to involve other artists and other collectives, it will very likely, and in fact, surely not just involve Good School. So Good School surely will invite even more participants and collectives to participate in Asia Art Archive's library reopening and exhibition. But I think it's very interesting to add to what Susanna is saying, this idea of Tan opening up his house to artists, which resounds with ruangrupa, starting in a living room. This idea of Mei Feng, to go back to what you were saying, Jane, kind of giving space over to artists who need it, this idea of practicality or pragmatics. I think it's very, very interesting because in many ways, my sense is that for this ruangrupa, the audience was very much the same as the participant. And I think that kind of conflation of audience and participant, an ever-expanding participant list, is one of the kind of key points of this documenta that I haven't quite figured out yet, but I know it is incredibly important to think about audience in that way.
That's excellent. It leads to one of our next questions. To bring together a couple of questions, the difference between audience, or the lack of difference between audience and participant. What is the day-to-day like? In terms of being there, and this obviously would go to Susanna, what is the day-to-day like? Are people hanging out with you? What is the vibe? Can you tell the difference between somebody who is one of the participants and somebody who is an audience member, or not audience member in this case, a visitor who has just arrived? And if so, what is it? And does it matter?
Yeah. I feel as an audience, they really feel like an audience, just like come to see the exhibition. But I feel what is interesting is how can we continue to engage the participant, the participating artists and collective continue to be a participant in this 100 days. So in most of the exhibition, they come to set up, like an artist come to set up, there may be an opening dinner, there may be an individual talks, then they go. But I think what is interesting is how can we as continue to be a learner, continue to be participants over these 100 days as a participants in a sense, both organizer, both artists, but also continue to be a learner, a lumbung members. So I think this is more interesting because at the beginning, when ruangrupa invite us, I said, okay, how can we engage people in Germany? But for them, we just come 100 days. What they have engaged with Germany is through the rural house. That is like 2 years before the place has started. But for what they are interested in is to really make this over 100 art organization and collectives to continue to work together after these 100 days. So that's why right before, like 6 or 7 months before the exhibition start, we have this weekly majalis, weekly Zoom hangout, which will deeply help us to know about each other and also find your like-minded friends. But what they want even more is now through this in-person physical gathering. So for example, what is the reality is during the day, of course, the exhibition open. Some of us may be at different sites to greet their visitors or do different tours. During the day, we may have events. But when there is event, we always try to go to different events so that we really become friends to support each other. But what is even more interesting is good school create a good kitchen, which is at the back of the Fridericianum. So at the beginning, it's just people who know will go, but now it become a gathering space. I can already see the change between June and July. How artists or friends of artists openly invited to go there, and people cook together like we have cooked a few times for others. The idea of generosity, like the idea of exchanging ideas of being the host and guest, like anyone can go to be a host and anyone who can be there to cook. Then we just have announced that today, let's say AAA is the host, they will cook for everyone, come to get some Cantonese food, etc. But the other day, maybe another roadmap, Africa cluster come to do some couscous, for example. So the idea of sharing is really embedded in the whole project. So, and then the conversation continue after all this exhibition, all this formal public talk. So friendship, in fact, for them is really start from there, and we make friends there, and then they can continue after 100 days. Another thing also very interesting is apart from the individual production costs, like in some exhibition, like if you're a big name artist, you have more costs. If you're a smaller organization, we may have smaller, but for us, they make everything equal, no matter your big name, small name. But what is interesting is that they have something called collective ports. They give it to different groups. Let's say the cluster that we have in the Fridericianum, we need to decide together how do we like to use that. So that again, through that process, you need to find your common interest. Because for Fridericianum, we all care about education and the idea of space sharing and resource sharing. So that's why we put the money in building the common library, where Oskar and Chris sit, and we also use the money to support some publishing, some buying of books, etc. But another group who are interested in land, they use the money to buy a small piece of land so that they can continue to operate even after the 100 days. So I think for ruangrupa, what they care is how can we sustain this relationship after this 100 days. So through this kind of friendships, hand out, which for them is the most effective way. So it's very different from, so time basically is the thing that we have invested the most in this project.
Very interesting. Chris, have you thought, one of the questions that has recently come in is a very long question, but it really talks a little bit about what is more a reflection, and we will be sending all of you the comments that have come in so far. But just to summarize, and we're at 9:04 right now, so we're a little over, or we're just at where we're supposed to be. But one of the comments, and I think this is a reaction that I have when I listen to Susanna, and I hear about documenta, and I hear about the 50 collectives and the 1,500 artists, and I hear about all the things that we've been doing. And I realize that, a normal visitor would come probably for 3 days, maybe a little bit more than that. And you're supposed to be hanging out, and you're supposed to be making friends, and you're supposed to be, participating. How in the world can you actually do this when at the same time you feel as if you've got to see everything, and you've got to, be every place, and you've got to, on one level, is 100 days, does the visitor, should the visitor also be there for 100 days in order to take it all in? And how is it, what would be a good strategy for a visitor coming in? Because it seems a bit, frankly, a little overwhelming.
Chris, maybe you answer it. You are more as a visitors, both organizer and visitors. I'm just curious about your experience. Maybe it's nice to share your experience.
I think that's a really amazing question from Dan, and I'm going to take 5 seconds to think about it. Because indeed, it is overwhelming. Documenta consists of much more than the Fridericianum where we were. There were also satellite events and offsite events. And as Susanna mentioned, the 280 programs in June and July alone meant that it's an impossibility to attend all of them. I think that's actually a conundrum of having this model, proposing this model out there. And if I were to try to explain the kind of reasoning or justification on ruangrupa's part, perhaps I would say this: in the same way that the exhibition itself was not the goal for Documenta this time around, but rather the friendships that are initiated during these 100 days of Documenta and the kind of repercussions throughout life that happen afterwards. Perhaps this is one of those exhibitions where one need not see everything in its totality, but rather one can approach it piecemeal and draw from that and bring back to one's own life or one's own exhibition making, or Dan, in your case, perhaps it's writing and studio making. Take lessons learned from Documenta and disperse it in the way that these ideas can laterally disperse throughout the world. I certainly know that Asia Art Archive learned lessons and grew through the process of documenta. And some of those lessons, including articulating a space for community, thinking about different kinds of knowledge, not just textual knowledge, thinking about embodied knowledge, and thinking about non-hierarchical learning from each other rather than always learning from historical precedent. These are lessons that we will take with us and will take years to unpack, but surely will prove valuable. But thank you for a very challenging and interesting question.
Yeah, it's unlike, I think the way they put programs in the physical space is not in a separate lecture room. So it's just embedded in the exhibition. So if you remember, we talk about the lumbung ideas. The ground floor is the social space, then living space, and the storage. So the social space basically is the space for programs. So it just happened embedded into the whole exhibition. For example, African participants group, they have a tent. During the day, you may think there is an exhibition of a tent, like with some tea ceremony material. But in fact, in the afternoon, they're activated as a social space, and there's singing, there's talk, there's conversation. But I feel that the audience very naturally know that this is not the typical exhibition. When there is something, they just naturally go in and sit and participate. So they don't register, and they don't, it's unlike that, oh, you are registering a public programs. When you go into the exhibition, it happened, there is a program, then people just sit in. So I just like this saying when we do the resource sharing session, even during the technical check, people think that we are doing arts. So basically, this changed the way audience think about art. Whatever you do, they are coming, the curiosity basically just so big. Every single thing, they are quite curious. So are you doing arts now? Then we say we are doing technical setup, but we will have a talk in 1 hour, for example. So I think this kind of embody, so learning is not happen. Again, similar to what AA do in our exhibition, right? Learning happen in living space, learning happen in vernacular knowledge. So the whole exhibition are not much the organized, like the main programs. The key documenter only do the 3 weekends of programs, a weekend in July, a weekend in August, and a weekend in September. All other programs are self-initiated by all lumbung members, all the artists, because when we are invited, they invite their like-minded friends. We are all interested in activation. We are interested in programming. So we just naturally, that is part of our practice. So they said that you just continue to do what you do. So that's why so many programs, so many activation, we don't care about the number. So sometimes there are 20 people sitting together, we still do it. There are 50 people, 100 people. And also they also have other channels they have seen. They have a called Lumbung Press. They keep printing over. So it's printing in the middle of the whole exhibition. There is radio station, and there is one thing they call harvest. They invite a team of illustrator, writer, etc. to even before that 6 months, there is these people who do all these harvests, and then they share the harvest in the exhibition through videos, through sometimes the tests, through publications. So I think the whole idea is every day, basically.
Well, Susanna, I love the way that you're talking about the blurring of life and art. I think it's marvelous to think that the tech setup is conflated with an art process, and I think that's exciting. I think we have maybe a chance for 1 or 2 more questions. In terms of these programs, obviously there's some logistical issues that people are asking about, whether there are COVID protocols that people need to attend to in terms of going there. What has that been like? Because I think a lot of people now after this talk are going to be eager to find out for themselves about the exhibition.
Okay, so there's almost like no COVID. People just keep coming in. So basically no, and there's no restriction at all. But during the opening week, something happened is that a lot of staff were sick, like the documenta staff. And there's party in the first week, so the artists are sick. So because of that, they announced a stop of 4 days of program in the first 4 days after the opening. So this was a big thing, because imagining many these kind of artists are going to do activation, but they stop all these programs. But I think stop in the sense that officially they don't support you, because they need to care about the team as well. But as artists are creative, so we just do it by ourselves. Like, for example, if we can't do it in the session space, we just do it at our library space. So our exhibition space. And if we can't use the official microphone, we find the karaoke microphone to do it at our sites. And some artists try to do the program at outdoor, so to ensure the everything is fine. So it just happened in 3 days. Then afterwards, everything back to normal. So, but it didn't stop anyone to organizing anything. And there's also enough freedom and enough trust that you can do what you want to do, and people continue spreading the words. So it didn't affect. But in general, basically, there's no any special arrangement due to COVID.
Okay. Well, I think we're almost at the end. We're at 9:15 now. We're almost at the end. I was wondering, Chris, whether you had some extra words about the experience that you've had. As you said, Susanna said that she's talked so much about these things, and I keep hoping that you're writing this down, Susanna, that you've taken a diary, that you've got all these, all this material you're documenting. With one of the problems of being in an archive is oftentimes the archivists are the worst archives of their own work. This was an amazing experience. So hopefully you are documenting this because there's obviously so much to unpack going forward. Chris, would you like to have a last word as to potentially some of your final thoughts? Not that it's final, the exhibition goes on till September 25th, if I'm correct. And will there be Asia Art Archive people there until the 25th, or how is our space going to be activated now that you, Susanna and Orske are leaving? And then Chris, what are your final thoughts? You're muted. I'm glad
that's a great question. Susanna just returned from Kassel and running some programs. And for now, I think that the Asia Art Archive team is regrouping in Hong Kong. But this doesn't necessarily mean that documenta is ended for us. I saw that Virginia asked also a question about the length of documenta. And I think it'll go far beyond the 100 days. As mentioned, the Collective School will be our inaugural exhibition here in Hong Kong. And in some ways, we'll be taking a component of documenta and expanding that component back here in Hong Kong for the audiences here in Hong Kong. For me, the really, James?
Go ahead. No, please go ahead.
The really interesting kind of conundrum that I came across is, as archives, we tend to think about art and art history as these things that progress through time, right? We think about it historically. But when we introduce a term like collective and focus on collective and friendship, we are really thinking laterally, right? In terms of learning from each other and not necessarily a generation that came before. And I think negotiating this kind of vertical and lateral axes will be one of the challenges for Asia Art Archive's Collective School exhibition, which takes place at an archive, but involves contemporary artists. Because in many ways, if you think of our specific contribution to documenta, we are an archive that participated in a contemporary art exhibition. So the collective school will be asking contemporary collectives now to come and engage with archival material. But those are only two ways that the lateral and vertical can come together. I think that there are actually even more sophisticated ways that are possible. Simultaneous to Documenta in Kassel, Asia Art Archive ran a symposium called Art Schools of Asia. And I think this idea of a school also kind of puts a crimp in things. Schools are hierarchical. So what does it look like to have a school that is non-hierarchical? These alternative pedagogies that we focus on, which is part of this collective school exhibition. So I think that's another crimp on the vertical and the horizontal. And then finally, Susanna, you spent much time speaking about the vernacular and the daily life and bringing the daily life and the vernacular in. And I believe the exhibition after the collective school will also be thinking about daily life and the vernacular and how that intersects with embodied knowledge, which is to say knowledge that can be intergenerational, but somehow bleeds laterally into everyday life. So I think that we'll be playing with some of these themes, Jane, for the foreseeable future. My guess is that for another 8 to 12 months, we'll really be unpacking these in a very exciting way.
Well, that's great. And I think what we'll close, however, Susanna and Chris, I want you to promise to keep us all advised and to make sure that you document these conversations and share them with us around the world, but also with your offspring, let's call it that way, in Asia Art Archive, or your intergenerational offspring at Asia Art Archive in America and also in Delhi. So we look forward to more collaborations and more conversations. And thank you very much for what an incredibly illuminating and interesting and intriguing tour, as well as